But first and foremost, I do two things before I even get started on a game, and that is one, what is the main mechanic or two mechanics of the game that I want to make, and then second, which is kind of tied to two, is why do players care or what will interest a player, or in another way, why I want players to enjoy the game. So, or why what players would enjoy about the game. But right after that, I usually get to making how I want to divide up the game. So what I mean by that is, say we throw this game up over here. Oh my sweet goodness, I can't do this is stream of consciousness, by the way. But say we go, make the main part of the game, where in my case it's usually RPG Maker, but we're being conceptual here. So say it's a shooter, a platformer, any kind of genre, you have a main part of the game that you have in mind: the story, the characters, maybe the music, maybe the graphics you want to use. Maybe you're an artist and you work more in the art phase, so you want to make the UI, the art, the characters, the backgrounds great, so on and so forth. So there's what I consider the main part. For me, it's mainly going to be the gameplay and the characters, but you get the point. And so when I move on to the thought of variables, I usually like to tie variables into the main parts first and kind of get them situated. So in my case, what does that mean? I'll use another example. So say you have a visual novel, you want main variables to exist. Maybe a character has a health pool, maybe they have HP, maybe they have affection, there's an affection system, and so they have affections with other characters in the game. Maybe you have story flags that you want to trigger, maybe there's a war going on, maybe there's a journey that your character is taking, so on and so forth. These are all variables I would throw in this main bubble. This is important because as we add on more mechanics, or in my case, if I were to use an example, a battle system, I would want to tie variables tied to battle into this, again, battle mechanic, battle system. And I wouldn't want them to kind of interfere with the main part of the game. And so what that means is that as I make more mechanics, so say you have another mechanic, we'll just say, we'll just call it the cooking system. There's a cooking system. There's not really good reason, at least when I'm making a game, to tie in variables together. I mean, that sounds logical enough to me, but bear with it. Again, this is my development process. So if I make a cooking mechanic, I have, say, their ingredients 1 through 10, and I don't know what they are yet, but they're tied to an ID for an item. I say, okay, yeah, these variables only exist in the cooking. The main part of the game or the battle system of the game will never touch them. That way I don't have to worry about, and I'll mention this again later on in depth, don't have to worry about, making any maintenance, making sure that there are any mistakes. Now, there are pitfalls or advantages and disadvantages to doing other parts, not just the way that I'm developing a game here, but you get the point. And then we can do the same, like maybe we make a racing mechanic in the middle of our game, maybe we make a racing simulation of some sort inside our game. Again, when you think of all of these mechanics, battle, cooking, racing sim, so on and so forth, any type of thing, maybe you're doing a mystery deduction style game, these don't need to be big mechanics. They could be small mechanics that are sprinkled in to, again, the main game might be a platformer, but there's a cooking system. The main game might be a mystery, but there's a dating sim, raising simulator. Things like that. I like to put my variables switches in the case of RPG Maker. Anything that is tied to these functions, so on and so forth, maybe even text files, maybe even graphics, they're only used in each of these systems. So that's why, or mechanics, whatever you want to call them, they're all divided up. Again, that's important later on because as I introduce variables into each of these, I don't want them normally mixed up. That makes it harder to maintain. Yes, you might have good documentation, and good documentation does help. Without documentation, you make a change, and basically, for those who don't know any programming, game development, you make a change and something else breaks. That's what causes bugs, glitches, crashes, so on and so forth. This is a very it's a very avoidable and very obvious way. Normally, games come out and they don't have glaring problems of this sort where variables or something interferes with something else, but it can be a problem if, say, the project is given to someone else. In my case, I don't really need to worry about that, but this is to put things into perspective. So again, it's a problem when you have variables kind of mixed up in all the systems. So say I have a main affection stat, and then I use that affection stat like heavily in the battle system because maybe a character attacks and it increases the affection. Well, I don't want to just increase the variable there, because what if I make a change in the main part of the game and then I forget to do it in the battle system? Again, this is a very simplified example. Then a bug will likely happen. I promise you that. And I've made this mistake before, very early in my game development days. And so what ends up happening is, as you do this more and more and more often, the how's this say? The day-to-day reason is very simple why this happens is because essentially it's laziness, and I've fallen into that pitfall a few times early on as well, and it still do to some extent now when I forget. This is why I write everything down, is because, and why documentation is important, is that you have a bunch of variables mixed up all over the place. So instead, what normally would happen, again, in my case, this is what I do. There are several ways to handle this. In fact, some game development software handles this very well, or helps you manage this very well, is that I like to use in-betweens. So in between the main system and the battle system, or in between the main system and the cooking system, maybe I make, let's just say, a function, or in the case of RPG Maker, an event that basically throws the variables from the cooking system into this event, and this event then changes variables in here. It might sound the same as the scribble part, which I showed earlier, but the reason why it's a lot nicer is because, or a lot better, in my, at least from what I've used, is because then if anything happens, I can just refer to these spots in between, and I don't have to go looking in racing, main, battle, cooking. Again, you can imagine these sections are all even divided up into mini sections themselves, and so you would only need to look at, okay, I only know this variable from main, maybe a character's name is going to be changed, and I only need to look in these in between, so on and so forth. Makes it a lot easier to manage your project, basically, especially when they're bigger projects. Again, and this is to kind of note the basically interactions in between. So maybe I use one or few events for the in-betweens of multiple systems. Maybe I want to do some one between battle and cooking, so on and so forth. So again, in any other game development software, these might be called functions, but you get the point. Now, the tricky part of this is what happens when you are using variables that encompass everything in game. So maybe you have a main, a fourth wall meta variable that affects all of your systems, the racing, cooking, battle, racing system. Maybe a character gets like a 10% efficiency bonus in all of these. Well, that's when you kind of need to be careful, but it's not like you can't do that. In fact, I'm doing this myself, and I have done this myself in several times. And the reason why there's an arrow going to game is that maybe the main title screen changes. Maybe your loads are messed up, as we know from certain visual novels or platformers, so on and so forth. But these are usually easier to maintain because you don't have hundreds of these variables. Maybe you have a few dozen, but again, if something goes wrong, you don't really need to look in all these places. You can just look at where these global variables are made. An example of this is that RPG Maker has a way for you to track where variables are being used. Not everywhere, but for the most part, it tracks where they're being used, and you can go in and find them. But if it's not variables, say it is an event in RPG Maker, say it is a function in most other game software, whether it's Unreal, Unity, so on and so forth, Game Maker, then yes, you do want, if not documentation, a way to track where things are being made. And I think most game developers have this in mind, but for anyone who doesn't, again, this, if nothing else, this is to at least show you a bit of how I'm working through things. And this is actually something I've made before, like recently, but I just wanted to put it in video format for you. So without further ado, this might be like a 0.5 episode just to kind of get you into my mindset when I'm going into game development. And of course, there's a lot of polishing to be done. But without further ado, let's actually move on to the next part of this, because there is something I can show you. So as I move into, well, I didn't actually prepare this part. You just have to take me at my word, even though this is in video format. So you'll notice that this looks a bit similar. It's because this is actually the map that I'm using for Sabaku Realize before. However, if I were to move into the other one, I will show you, oh my sweet goodness, it's not showing up. But to show you the other version of this, this is essentially the same map in Sabaku Realize itself. Now, I haven't fixed out, again, this is an old version of the project, for the sake of the video, but this is to kind of show you that essentially when I'm working on Sabaku Realize before, and I'm using basically we'll call it the chasing system for now, the chasing system can be transplanted into actually Sabaku Realize. So I'll call before Sabaku Realize before. Sabaku Realize, I'll just use the full name. But in before, there's the same system exists right now. You can go to the itch.io page and test it out yourself. There are a few bugs that I have corrected at point, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's easier for me to transplant it into the game itself. That way, when I'm testing these mechanics, and I do this often myself, but I figured I'd release something for players to play with, something that I usually like to do. That way, when I put it in the game, of course, there are things I need to do. The variable IDs are not going to be the same. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't need to worry. But basically, it's easier to transplant. That way, I'm not just working from scratch, and then I add whatever I wanted to add onto it. Maybe there is, again, I'm just throwing on an example. Maybe the affection system affects the chasing mechanic in this game, then I would again introduce a variable, either a variable in between, an event in between, something that works in between. That way I'm not working with the variable itself, and then keeping all those variables separate makes things a lot nicer for game development. But yeah, without further ado, not really much else to say at the moment. If I do make an update between now and, well, the next video, then you'll just see it when you go into it. Otherwise, again, the password is Quinn, Quinn, and if Future Jordan doesn't put that in the description, then you've heard it from me. But yeah, without further ado, not much time to be taken from you. Enjoy yourself. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.